welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and welcome to my new series talking about the best commander cards from each set. This is the inaugural episode. I'm going to be going through a lot of the older sets and pulling out what I think are the best cards for Commander. Some of these sets were around before a lot of Commander players were even born, I think. However, this will not be the same as my 10 cards video where I will be mentioning a bunch of cards that people have never heard of before. This will be a lot of cards that people have actually seen before, some cards that are really popular in the format. If you think about it, it's sort of like what I do with new sets. You know, whenever a new set comes out, I do a top 10 or a top 20 list. It's sort of like that, but I'm sort of going back in time and doing it, right? And it's really interesting, you know, when you go back and look through these sets, you don't actually think when you're playing a lot of these cards, they've been reprinted a lot, so you don't even realize which set they come from. And when you look at some of these older sets, you're like, oh wow, that's from that set? Oh, that card too? And all of a sudden, all these cards keep popping out that are from these older sets that you would never have thought of before. So it's interesting to go back and sort of look at it this way. I'm going to start out with Tempest. I'm actually not going all the way back and starting from the beginning. I thought, you know, starting from Alpha, Beta, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm going to jump around a little bit, I think. And Tempest, as I've said before, was the first set or the first block that I started with in Magic. There used to be blocks and expansions. They've sort of changed a whole bunch of things. It used to be that you would have a block and the first set in that block, so Tempest block, would be the main set, and then you would have expansions, which for Tempest was Stronghold and Exodus, and they would be smaller sets. So it was always 3 sets to a block. Of course, they changed that and they sort of jumped all over the place. I don't even know how it exactly works anymore. Nevertheless, I'm going to start with Tempest, which I think is a really fantastic set, and going through and looking at these cards for Commander definitely verified that for me. So starting out at number 10 is Aftershock, 2 red sorcery, destroy target artifact, creature, or land. Aftershock deals 3 damage to you. And this is one that flies a little bit under the radar. I did mention it on my 10 cards series. There will be a few cards that I mentioned in these lists that are from that series, and then there'll be a whole bunch that are obviously way too popular to mention in that series. Aftershock is one that I like a lot because it is a versatile card. I know 4 mana seems like a lot for a lot of people, also sorcery speed, but in a mono red deck, being able to destroy an artifact, creature, or land is great. The 3 damage to you is almost nothing. The creature part is the big one here. Obviously, red is good at destroying artifacts and lands. I love the versatility, but being able to just straight up destroy a creature in mono red is actually incredibly rare. That's why I think this card deserves a mention. Coming in at number 9 is Ancient Tomb. That's right, there will be lands on these lists, and I know a lot of people will think I'm crazy for having this so low, but let's be honest, this card does not go in every deck, okay? It just does not. So for those who haven't seen it before, tap, add 2 colorless, Ancient Tomb deals 2 damage to you. This is a very high-powered card. A lot of people feel like they should just shoehorn this into all their decks. I've seen people play this in like 3 and 4 color decks, which I don't think is very good because a lot of the times you want more colors, not so much the colorless mana. There is no option for not taking damage here, right? As the game goes along, you're going to have to keep tapping this for mana and taking the 2 damage every time. It certainly has its place. No question, it is a very popular card in the format. I have it rated low because for me, it is very specific in where you want to use it. I know people really love that turn 1 Ancient Tomb and then play a Signet scenario, but that's going to be rare. I think if you draw this card on like turn 5 or 6, it's not great. Having that 1 mana extra is okay. Taking the 2 damage every time you tap it really stings after a while. I talked about this when I did the cards that I don't play video because I never play this card. If you actually do the math and keep track of how much damage this is doing you through the course of a game, I think you would be surprised. It does a lot. Still a great card though, no question. Coming in at number 8, Coffin Queen. 2 and a black, zombie wizard 1/1. You may choose not to untap Coffin Queen during your untap step. And you can pay 2 and a black and tap. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. When Coffin Queen becomes untapped or you lose control of Coffin Queen, exile that creature. So this is such a fantastic creature. There's so much going on here that I think gets a little overshadowed. So first of all, just I repeatedly put stuff from my graveyard onto the battlefield is great, right? Even if you're just using this on yourself, it's great. But of course, you can use it on your opponents as well. You can steal stuff out of their graveyards. Maybe if you're in a milling theme, this is a fantastic fit because you can just take their best creature out of their graveyard, put it directly into play under your control. And if at any time you want to switch creatures, you see something better in a graveyard, you let this untap on your untap step, and then you can go get something else. And when you do, the creature that you previously had control of gets exiled exiled. So now this is also a way to steal stuff out of your opponent's graveyard so that they can't get it, right? This ability can be used at instant speed. So if your opponent's about to reanimate a big creature at instant speed, you can swap it out and steal it instead. And then that creature will get exiled when you let your Coffin Queen untap, and they'll never be able to get it back. So you can really screw somebody with this card as well. It just has so many different ways to use it. Great in any commander deck, in my opinion, even if you're not fitting anything in this theme at all. Coming in at number 7, Humility. And a lot of people aren't going to be happy to see this card, but it is an incredibly powerful effect. And I got to give it a mention too. White enchantment. All creatures lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1. This is, of course, an infamous card throughout the history of the game. It is an incredibly powerful effect. It shuts off pretty much everything. It is the best card at just shutting off creatures, right? Everyone's creatures lose all abilities. That basically means the whole text box is blank. You can keep the flavor text. That's about it, right? Everything else is gone. Doesn't matter what kind of ability it is, an activated ability, triggered ability, trample, death touch, anything. It's all gone. Every creature in play, commanders included, become 1/1 vanilla creatures. It is the best card probably in the history of the game for shutting creatures off. And if you got your Rex Sage and you're like, aha, I'm going to get rid of that Humility, sorry, does not work, because as soon as your Rex Sage hits the battlefield, that ETB ability no longer exists. So that won't work. It can be tough to get this thing off the table sometimes, especially when you're like me and you like those abilities staple on a creature. So I'm not giving this card a mention because I particularly love it. It's just such a powerful effect in a commander game that it needs to be on this list. Coming in at number 6, a card I just mentioned in my last video for my 10 cards series, Dothi Embrace, 2 and a black enchantment. Pay black and a black, target creature gains shadow until end of turn, which essentially means it's unblockable. Shadow being the mechanic that came out in Tempest, has been revisited a little bit, but for the most part, it was a Tempest block ability. What it does is that creature can't block or be blocked except by creatures with shadow, right? So if you have this in your deck, it's going to make your creatures for the most part unblockable unless your opponents happen to have a shadow creature. It really is one of the best ways, I mean, the best way in mono black to make creatures unblockable, but even just all around to repeatedly make creatures unblockable. This is one of the best options for you. Really great card in a commander game. Coming in at number 5, Scroll Rack. And again, as I'm looking through these cards, I'm like, oh yeah, Scroll Rack was printed in Tempest. I forgot about that. A lot of these cards I forgot were originally printed in Tempest. And then as I get up the list of some of these other ones, probably a lot of people will be like, oh wow, that was printed in Tempest. There's a lot of great cards that were printed in that set. Scroll Rack is a fantastic one. 2 mana artifact, 1 mana and tap. Exile any number of cards from your hand face down. Put that many cards from the top of your library into your hand. Then look at the exiled cards and put them on top of your library in any order. So just so many ways to use this card. It's just a great way to swap out cards in your hand. And then if the stuff you put on top of your library was garbage and you don't want it, instead of drawing it, you can just crack a fetch land or something and shuffle it all away so you can get something fresh. Great way to stack the top of your library. Probably the best way, right? In the history of the game, this is the best way to stack the top of your library. You can do it repeatedly. It's only 1 mana. Just really the best card in the history of the game at doing this particular effect. So of course I got to give it a mention. Coming in at number 4 is, I guess, a group of cards, the Medallion Series, right? And again, came out in Tempest. I forgot about that. The Medallion Series is originally from Tempest. 2 mana artifacts, all of them, and they will make your spells cost 1 less depending on the color, right? So red spells cost 1 less to cast, or blue spells cost 1 less to cast. For me, these are auto includes in monocolored decks. Just basically having all your spells cost 1 less is pretty fantastic. I play a lot of monocolored decks, so I do use them a lot. Is it worth it to put these in a 2-color deck? So if I'm playing a black and white deck, do I want to throw them in there? You know, maybe not. It's up to you guys. If you know, maybe there's a specific reason why you want your stuff to cost less. Maybe you're storming off, something like that. So obviously they're great there as well. But just in general, if I have a mono green deck and I have that Emerald Medallion, having 90% of my spells cost 1 less is really, really handy. Coming in at number 3, that's right. It's originally from Tempest, Living Death. 3 black sorcery. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. Just an incredibly powerful effect. And I really love cards like this. You know, there is a lot of cards from Tempest that are these symmetrical effects, universal effects that affect everybody. You know, you look at them and you're like, okay, well, that seems fair because it's affecting everybody, but because of the deck that you are playing, and particularly in Commander, it's super good, right? In a graveyard graveyard deck, this is so good. You just dump your library into your graveyard, you living death. Maybe your opponents will get a few creatures out of their graveyard, but you're just going to get so much more that it's going to be game over. You know, almost every time I've seen a living death cast in a commander game, it was pretty much game over from there. This is one of the best cards. This is the best card in the entire game for mass graveyard recursion. And then on top of it, it's sort of a pseudo board wipe, right? That is where this card is also really, really great. Each player is going to exile all creatures they control, right? So this is actually a fantastic board wipe as well. If your opponent has a bunch of creatures and an Avacyn in play, this is going to exile all their stuff and put it into their graveyard. So it's a great way to get around stuff like that as well. It's a really underrated board wipe even in mono black. Just a incredibly powerful and great card in the history of the game, but particularly in Commander, I think. Coming in at number 2, that's right, it's from Tempest, Goblin Bombardment. 1 in a red enchantment. Sacrifice a creature, Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. And this is one of those cards that I think when they originally printed, they thought like, it's okay. I mean, sacrifice a creature to do 1 damage, that's all right. They probably did not realize that this would end up being one of the greatest sack outlets ever printed. Maybe the best, I don't know. It's a free sack outlet, and everyone knows that having a sack outlet that is free, that you can just sacrifice all your creatures to, is incredibly important. And also the fact that you can throw damage around is important as well. This card goes in so many decks. This card is fantastic. I have a gameplay video where one of my patrons had a whole bunch of token creatures out, had a Goblin Bombardment in play, and it's just like you're holding all your opponents hostage. When you're in that situation, there's very little they can do. And actually in that game, if you go watch, he actually was able to manipulate how the game turned out by sacrificing his own creatures. It was a really interesting scenario. I encourage you to go check it out. Just for sure, one of the best sack outlets in the history of the game. I don't know if it's necessarily the best, but definitely it's right up there. And coming in at number 1, another land and a card that when I was cracking it open in packs back in the day, I thought it was garbage. And the reason I thought it was garbage is because I didn't want to be sacrificing my own lands. I wanted lands so I could cast my Rootbreaker Worm. So for me, I'm like, well, why would I want to sacrifice my own land? I want lots of lands in play so I can cast my big stompy creature. But I didn't understand the intricacies of the game at the time. So of course I'm talking about Wasteland, one of the best lands probably ever printed. Okay. I mean, if we're talking about utility lands, so it's got to be number 1 on this list. Taps to add a colorless mana, but of course you can sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land. Again, when you're first starting out playing Magic, you think, okay, well, I'm sacrificing my land to destroy my opponent's land. That doesn't seem very good. It's just a 1-for-1, right? But of course, there are so many important non-basic lands out there that completely take over the game. I talk about this all the time. If you check out my 30 utility lands video, land destruction lands are at number 1, right? Whether it be a Ghost Quarter or a Strip Mine. I suppose Strip Mine you could consider to be better than Wasteland because there's no restriction on it being non-basic. But for me, I really like Wasteland because it actually only hits non-basic lands, and I don't think I ever want to be hitting the basic lands. Strip Mine can get a little bit of hate that way because usually people don't frown on destroying non-basic lands as much as they frown on destroying the basic lands, right? I know there's a lot of little nuances there. Nevertheless, Wasteland is one of the best utility lands ever printed, and being able to destroy your opponent's non-basic lands in a commander game is paramount. It is just so important. You have to have some option for it, and this is one of the best, so that's why it's number 1. But that is it. That is all my top 10 cards from Tempest for the Commander format. What did I miss? There's a few I can think of off the top of my head. You know, when I was going through it, I was like, oh wow, there's a lot more here than I thought. I know there's going to be a couple mentions in the comments below. You're probably right. There is some cards that I skipped over that are really, really great cards. Not necessarily good in the Commander format though, right? I'm not looking at the best cards from Tempest. I'm looking at the best cards from Tempest for the Commander format. So if there's some you think I should have included, let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.